Hello and welcome to Crux Investor. We caught up earlier this morning with Shaun Verner, who's MD and CEO of Syrah Resources, a graphite company on the ASX. And if you want our thoughts and opinions on the conversation, the company's plans, and indeed the company itself, you can find that at cruxinvestor.com/club, where you can also find detailed company reports. There are commentaries from experts from around the world on a variety of companies and commodities, and there are training videos. Summaries of other interviews that we've done, and of course our thriving community of investors sharing their thoughts and ideas with each other in a nice safe environment. So do go along and join them at cruxinvestor.com/club. And of course we'd love your feedback too, so do give us a like, leave your comments below, and if you want to see what we talked about, take a look at the description below. Hey Shaun, how are you doing, sir?
Very well, thank you, Matt. Nice to spend the time with you.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining us all the way from Oz. How are things down in Melbourne?
Not too bad. We're out the end of the COVID lockdowns here, so getting back into a bit of freedom, and very good to see people out on the street again.
And will you be travelling anytime soon?
Well, that's probably a little more difficult. The borders are still shut, but yeah, absolutely, it's necessary to get back out there as soon as we can.
Yeah, and in terms of like running businesses, you find it's fine. Technology is your friend. Don't need to be on site.
Yeah, it's actually been surprisingly smooth for someone who was on the road probably a third of the time. We've managed to keep in touch with people really well, and whether it be customers, investors, all sorts of stakeholders. Obviously, it's better face to face at times for certain types of interactions, but overall, it's been pretty good. I think people have been flexible, and they've really tried to make it work through some pretty difficult times. Okay, fantastic. Well, look, we're going to learn about the world of graphite and your company today. But before we do, could you give us that 1-minute overview of the business, please? Yeah, sure, no worries. So Syrah Resources is the world's largest producer of natural graphite. We have the Balama graphite mine and processing plant in Mozambique. We're headquartered in Melbourne in Australia, and we're in the process of developing the first ex-China active anode material plant in Vidalia in Louisiana in the US. We have a marketing and trading office out of Dubai, and we have strong relationships into China, which is currently the largest consumer of natural graphite. So quite a wide reach for a company in its early stages, but we've been in production since late 2017, and although the market conditions have been particularly tough in the last year or so, we're really excited about where we're going with the Vidalia plant and the potential to bring the Balama operation back to market.
It's been really tough. I mean, I think as you've alluded to a couple of times there, Balama has had to shut down because of market conditions. So we better try and understand your business plan for moving things forward. So I guess let's start with the two operations. Let's start with Balama. That's in Mozambique. Yeah. So what's happening now?
Yeah, so we started Balama in 2017, at the end of 2017. And in 2019, even running at 50% capacity, we became the world's largest integrated producer of natural graphite. And we produced about 150,000 tonnes. The capacity of the operations around 350,000 tonnes, and the current global market is just over 800,000 tonnes a year. So it gives you a sense of the scale of the operation that was built. In the second half of 2019, we saw the year-on-year and month-on-month growth in electric vehicles, particularly in China, fall for the first time. And that was really a direct result of the reduction in subsidies for EVs in China in the second half of last year. So in the very back end of 2019, we took the decision to moderate production at Balama and await a rebalancing in the market. And we had started to see that at the start of 2020, but unfortunately it coincided with the start of COVID and the impacts there. So in March this year, we put Balama on a temporary suspension, awaiting the removal of restrictions around COVID and an improvement in market conditions. And I'm pleased to say that we're starting to see those market conditions improve and starting to look forward to when we might restart the Balama operation.
I mean, we better try and understand what the natural graphite market is. And I know you're talking about being an integrated company, right? But talk about the size of the market, because it doesn't seem very big. And if was it unusual, this kind of 2-year hiatus of where the pricing wasn't where you wanted it to be? I mean, what was causing that?
Yeah, I think so. As I said, the current market's about 800,000 tonnes a year. And with the growth of electric vehicles, we expect that market to triple in the next decade. And currently, around 65% of mined production globally has come from China, and more than 50% of consumption is in China. And all of the growth, essentially, that we expect in this market is expected to come from lithium-ion battery anode demand, primarily driven by electric vehicles. So Balama was really built in anticipation of that demand growth. And when that demand growth slowed back end of last year, that's what necessitated the moderation of production. So yes, it was something that was really unexpected. I mean, I think if you go back a couple of years, if you had have said to anyone that the year-on-year growth rate of EVs in China was going to fall in the back end of 2019, they would have said you were mad. So we're really in a position where we have been awaiting that improvement in year-on-year growth, and in the second half of 2020, we're really starting to see that come through.
Right, but you're not focused on China. You're focusing on Europe and US. That's why you've kind of set up the US operation, I guess.
Yeah, so it's important to distinguish between the natural graphite concentrate out of Balama and the active anode material downstream processing plant in the US. So Balama's capacity and the demand for natural graphite concentrate is primarily coming from China. So we sold around 80% of our 2019 production into China. And that's where the vast majority of anode production is currently coming from. So there are three steps or three major steps in the anode production supply chain in natural graphite. You've got the natural graphite concentrate. You've got a precursor material, which is a milled and shaped graphite. And 100% of that precursor, which is going into the anode lithium-ion battery business, is currently coming from China. Then you've got the finished anode, which is a coating applied to that purified spherical graphite. And about 85% of the anode globally comes from China. So you can see that the lithium-ion battery industry at the moment is almost totally reliant on Chinese supply. And that's why we've chosen to build a fully integrated plant for active anode material in the US.
Right. So it's a tough one at the moment because the Europeans haven't quite got their act together. Neither is the US. The Chinese are, they're much more advanced, right? So you as an organization have got to think, well, how do I get my funding? You've just done a BFS. The numbers look good. You've got to get operations up and running again at Balama. You've got to fund the build. Where's that money coming from?
Yeah, so let me start with the anode material side. The plant that we're looking to build in Vidalia, that we've just done the feasibility study for, we absolutely see a funding source and funding mix around that, which is driven by offtake of sales contracts underpinning that plant.
From where?
From the US and Europe. So, we're seeing that major expansion of lithium-ion battery manufacturing capacity and EV manufacturing capacity in Europe and the US. And there is a real desire amongst OEMs and amongst cell manufacturers to ensure that they have at least a complementary source of supply, but preferably also an alternative source of supply. And that's critical given that current very heavy reliance that the supply chain has on China.
Okay, and are we seeing, obviously you've got different types of products, different stages, but are you seeing the price discovery in the market again that's going to lend you and the lenders of any capital that you need to go and get comfort that you're going to be able to produce at margins allowing you to repay them and or make money?
Yeah, I think certainly the feasibility study and the basis on which the feasibility study was built was that we had to have an OPEX base for the plant in the US, which was competitive with China. And that's been our focus right from day one. We have no desire to try and sell material to China. This is really around ensuring that the cost base allowed for a competitive price compared to Chinese sourced material or Chinese material which is being value added in Japan and Korea. So we've been very focused on that right from day one, and our interactions in the supply chain indicate that that this sort of cost base that we've put forward in the BFS is absolutely competitive.
So how important is the integrated component to you? Because we've got another couple of graphite companies coming on this week and beginning of next. Given the size of the market, not very big, it seems. New entrants coming on at the beginning of the supply chain is quite damaging, right? Because there's more supply in the market, prices get affected. So is that the defense mechanism, the integration?
Yeah, partially, but really it's about the quality of your asset when it comes to your competitive positioning. Yeah. And it's really worth pointing out that Balama's entry into the upstream natural graphite market in late 2017 was the first major new project to come on stream for quite some time. And as I mentioned earlier, that 350,000 tonne capacity put a massive brake on projects that would potentially follow. Balama's reserve, gives us a 50-year mine life at 350,000 tonnes annual production, and the reserve grade is over 16% TGC compared to an average of between 5 and 8 elsewhere in the world. So the quality in the ground, the size of the asset and the cost competitiveness of when this thing runs at full capacity really puts a moat around it compared to projects which may wish to follow. So having said that, the target market for that material is primarily China at the moment. And in order to diversify that market, the integrated strategy of building the active anode material plant in the US, supplying the US market and the European market gives us an alternative outlet for that material as it grows, at the same time that buyers are looking to localise that source of active anode material supply.
So your current market that you're aiming for would be China?
From Balama in Mozambique, around 80% goes into China.
Right. And that would be on the basis of fixed term contracts, offtakes?
So primarily the way that we set up the start of Balama was to get volume-based offtakes and to have a mix of spot contracts as well, because one of the really interesting things about the natural graphite market and the fact that China has dominated both consumption and supply for so long is that price discovery was really challenging. And in order to make the best possible fist of that as we entered the market, we had a mix of contracting types and a mix of contracting tenors. And China's always challenging on fixed price offtake contracts. I've worked across a number of commodities over my 25 years. And really it's about ensuring that we can place that material, and the spot market in China will determine the price that's paid in China. So outside of China, outside of China in the industrial markets, there's a much stronger term contract and fixed price contract culture. A lot of tenders run, etc. So the mix in the book does lend itself between term at volume, spot price, and term at a fixed price as well.
See, I always find it interesting when companies come on the show and they talk about we're going to be ex-China, where we don't need them. We're going to operate outside of China, but the first thing they do is take Chinese money because it enables them to get things going, right? So you're having to do that. So how do the Chinese feel about enabling a potential competitor down the line? Because you're using that language a lot in your presentations. We're ex-China, so they got to see that. So does that affect conversations?
So we talk about. We talk about ex-China, but we also talk about being a complementary source. And ultimately here, this market is growing so quickly and has the potential to be so large that there is room for everyone. A lot of my background was in the base metals industry, and there's a very strong history of companies selling concentrates into smelters and then competing with those smelters by producing metals at the same time. So I view this as a very similar situation in that, your customer base in some parts of the supply chain can be your competitor. You can have, a constructive relationship around that, particularly where there's strong market growth. So I don't see that as an issue. But of course, there's competitive tension there.
Yeah. So competitive tension in today's environment where people are talking about, critical minerals lists and, protectionism and so forth, nationalism and so forth. It comes back to the first earlier question around how do you get this thing financed? If people are looking at Chinese money involved, is that affecting your conversations in the West with regards to being able to get the funding that you need, off the back of your BFS?
Yeah, look, SYR has been, strongly equity funded right from the outset, and one of the really interesting things about it compared to a number of other battery raw materials projects, particularly in the lithium space, is that we don't have that challenge of, geopolitically differentiated shareholder base that can be really tough to manage. So we see that the US plant really provides an opportunity for funding on the basis of it being built and supplying that US and European market. And certainly I think there's a very strong appreciation now for the importance of independence in supply, or at least multiple sources of supply. And that's, you're seeing that come through in government critical minerals discussion. You're seeing it come through in the way that OEMs and cell manufacturers are approaching their long-term sourcing discussions. So it's something that is not unique to the battery space. I think there's very few places in the world where you'd be happy with a single supplier from a single country.
Okay, so talk to me about the US operation again, because like I say, you're talking about anode material manufacturer there. And is that because there's the further downstream you go, there's more of a premium, you're capturing more of the margin. So how are you going to be able to deliver this in short order to be able to get the kind of contracts you want, stateside? What sort of conversations are you having now with OEMs, these automotive manufacturers, about them trying to secure? Because we've seen people like Tesla go and do deals with Piedmont on the lithium side, right? They want to secure a lithium supply of hydroxide lithium down the line. Are they having the same conversations with graphite companies?
Look, I think certainly the OEMs and the cell manufacturers are as interested in their anode source of supply as they are in their cathode sources of supply. There's no doubt that it's as important. I think the last couple of years has really seen a strong focus from the OEMs and cell manufacturers on that diversification piece that I talked about before. It's important to recognise with the US that we started work there in 2018, and we have existing infrastructure in place. We have 5,000 tonnes of milling and shaping capacity. We have purification capacity, and we're working with a toll partner on carbonisation, which is the last step in active anode material production, as we install our furnace in Q1 next year. So that whole process has been designed around getting product into OEMs and into cell manufacturers for testing and qualification, because you have to be having those conversations at the same time as you're bringing forward a project like Vidalia and the BFS looking to move to commercial capacity, because a buyer wants to know that the product quality and performance is there, that something is cost competitive and it's going to be able to scale. And the combination of the testing and development work that we're doing and the BFS gives those discussions that we're having a real added impetus.
And so how important is the lithium-ion battery in cars to your business? Because I kind of imagine if I'm a CEO of a graphite company or any commodity company that's a battery metal, when a Tesla day happens, I've kind of got my heart in my mouth going, oh man, I hope they don't come up with a new design. We've seen that with kind of, cobalt or like even sort of, the different commodities, because there are new designs coming up all the time. So where's the business outside of lithium-ion batteries?
All of the growth is related to lithium-ion batteries, and I think it's really important to appreciate that anode composition in a lithium-ion battery since the date of commercialisation has been graphite. It's been a mix of natural and synthetic graphite, but it's been graphite from then to now. There is the addition of some silicon, but a small proportion of silicon is going into some types of anode material, but lithium-ion battery anode material is graphite. And all of the lithium-ion battery expansion capacity, production capacity expansions that are going on, and the anode production capacity expansions to support that are based on graphite anodes. So whilst we expect to see some addition of silicon, the likelihood of a fundamental substitution of material or a significant change in blending is not something that worries us at the moment in the next 10 years. We're really quite confident about the composition of the lithium-ion battery anode.
Right. Okay. So they've been having conversations with you. There's nothing that indicates that there's any change on the horizon. But so you were saying there's no plan B because there's no need for a plan B.
Well, it's an interesting one because if you look back at the natural graphite market, historically it was all industrial uses, steel making, refractories, various specialty uses. 300 plus uses for graphite, and at the moment we're probably at 25% to 30% lithium-ion battery demand as a proportion of demand. And that very quickly moves to 80 and 90% in that market because of the adoption of lithium-ion batteries and EVs. So the industrial market, steelmaking will grow, sort of GDP, IP levels, of course, but the real story here for the natural graphite market and the anode market is around lithium-ion batteries and EVs being the major driver in that.
Okay, so tell me what stage you're at with regards to financing, because you're going to need these offtakes in place. Presumably you're going to need agreements and contracts, and people have some sense of your economics, I guess, from the BFS, obviously, when things get up and running back in Mozambique. But where are you with those conversations? How much money are you raising? How long is it going to take?
So the BFS outlines two cases that we have for the Vidalia plant. One is a 10,000 tonne anode plant per annum, and the other is a 40,000 tonne case. And just as a little bit of background, there's roughly 2 tonnes of natural graphite concentrate that goes to produce 1 tonne of natural graphite anode material. A little bit under that. So we've been really clear with the development path for Vidalia and the active anode material plant that we will seek to get those offtake arrangements in place before we make an investment decision to move to construction. At the moment, we're adequately funding the day-to-day operation of Vidalia, and what we need to do to get qualification material into the hands of customers for assessment. We have a detailed design phase that we need to head through in the first half of 2021, but the $120 million that's required for construction and commissioning of a 10,000 tonne plant is something that we will seek to fund on the basis of arrangements with offtake customers. We do see that there's a good basis for debt funding, a significant portion of that. Clearly a manufacturing plant with an offtake or a series of offtakes in the US is a very different proposition to a resources project in Mozambique in a market that people don't understand. And as I said, it's a path around not just a BFS, it's a path around product development, qualification processes as well. So the BFS is something which is important to continue to facilitate those discussions and to give a lot more insight into how we bring this capacity to market. But it's not something that has a binary impact the day it's released.
Right. And with regards to getting product in the hand of potential off-takers, I mean, how long do they sit on this? When do they come out and go, okay, this is good. We'll sign a contract with you. We'll do an off-take agreement with you.
Yeah, so it obviously differs by customer and by application, but really the way we see it is it separates into two key steps. The first is a review of the physical and chemical characteristics and performance of the material. And that's something that doesn't take a long time. It's done through cell testing and an elemental analysis, of course. And that's that can happen in a couple of months. The second part of the process is life cycle testing, and that can take a long time. It can be 12 months plus to get that life cycle testing complete. And that's why, this is a process that we started some time ago. But we also see that there are not just drivers around the product performance that will facilitate offtake. There's obviously also alternative sourcing, cost, and particularly now when we look at the US and the EU, ESG considerations and the environmental differentiation of product coming out of the supply chain. So we see all of those things as important and contributing to that conversation.
Right, but so in terms of ramp up, I'm trying to get an understanding of how quickly this thing ramps up. I get the two cases, 10,000 versus 40,000.
Yep.
The former more likely than the latter?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, we had an interesting experience bringing a 350,000 tonne capacity mine to an 800,000 tonne market. I think we've taken a very different approach as we've put together the BFS for the downstream plant. The 10,000 tonne capacity in the timing that it would come on, sort of mid-23, end of 23, would see us being no more than what we expect to be somewhere between 10 and 15% of what's required in the US alone. And having the US and Europe as potential markets mean that we're taking a much more conservative approach. Right.
So in terms of the revenue generation from Mozambique with offtake sales, there'll be revenue generated there. You're going to have to work out how you construct the funding for the, would you call it a pilot plant initially? I mean, how are you positioning it?
No, this is absolutely a commercial scale plant. Absolutely.
Okay, right. So 2023 until revenues. So what happens between now and 2023?
Well, I think clearly the planning that OEMs and cell manufacturers are doing is a long way out, and making sure that they have capacity available because there's nothing else coming on in the meantime is important in the US. So we certainly see that that funding path is available there for us to pursue and to get the Vidalia plant process up and running. In the meantime, of course, it is critical that we get Balama back to market. And as I said earlier, the market conditions are starting to look more positive there. But revenue generation out of Balama over the coming years intervening between now and when Vidalia comes on is important for sure.
So, I mean, you've talked about the European and US OEMs, and we've seen lots of governments throwing subsidies out, and we've seen, well, here in the UK, 2040 goes to 2030 in terms of, the ban on sales of, petrol or diesel cars, catalytic converter cars. When are you seeing the recovery of, in the graphite market with regards to the different products in there? Because it's hard for us to sort of understand the market. It's kind of small. It's fairly opaque in the sense that it's hard to sort of fathom pricing, and therefore, when do your economics really kick in here? Because it's all at the moment. It's just kind of a spreadsheet exercise, it seems, for us as investors.
Yeah, sure. No, as we look at the upstream natural graphite market, we're already seeing price recovery in the coarse flake market, which is a smaller portion of the market. But the industrial uses for coarse flake and the challenges that have been there in supply with us out of the market and with low prices and lower production over the last 6 to 12 months mean that there has been some recovery there already. The key, however, for the fines market, which is the bulk of our production, about 80 to 85%, is that electric vehicle and lithium-ion battery-driven demand. And if you look at Q3, compared to the first half of the year, we had electric vehicle sales and production growth up 70% year on year. Anode production in the last couple of months has been up around 40% year on year. So that demand is starting to feed through to the natural graphite market, the fines market in China. And we've just started to see in the last few weeks the first signs of the price uptick in China for that fines material. So we're obviously cautiously optimistic around that. And it's an important decision for us, obviously, with a large production capacity and wanting to bring Balama back online in a sustainable way, that we have a view that there's good momentum and growth in that market before we make that restart decision.
Okay, so cautiously optimistic means that you've got to bide your time until you see certain signs in the marketplace. So some of the things that you just said, you hope will happen. What's the moment you say, this is good enough for us to get going? This is good enough for us to actually, sign the term sheets that you may or may not have at that time? What do you need to say?
Yeah, I think it's the $1 million question. It's also one that's extremely commercially sensitive, right? Because the minute that the market is aware that Balama is coming back online, and we've made that decision, and there's a 2 to 3 month ramp up period, then obviously the need to place material and the tension in the market has the potential to shift. So we're keeping that assessment process very much to ourselves at the moment, but the factors that we watch are absolutely those that I mentioned: EV sales growth, anode production growth, pricing, and import-export out of China. So those three things are really important.
What do you mean the market? Things in the markets will start to shift? Because obviously, if you come back online, there's more product in the market. That's going to affect pricing for sure at the scales you're talking about, right? So you need to have secured your fixed price contracts or long-term contracts before you make an announcement into the market. Is that how it works?
No, I'm saying that we have to be confident that there is momentum which will sustain the re-entry of Balama into the market. And this is not it's not a science, of course, but it's also not something that we see as super difficult. If you go back to the first half of 2019, annual EV production was running at 2 million units. Balama was running at about 50% capacity, and we were putting more than 15,000 tonnes a month into the market. If you look at the EV market today, the recovery that we've seen in the last few months is having the market running at 3 million units pro rata, with really good growth momentum behind it as well. So as that feeds through the supply chain into anode production and natural graphite demand, if that momentum is there as well, then we see that bringing Balama back online at those same sort of levels is something that will work well.
Okay, you mentioned ESG. Now, clearly in the automotive space, with these OEMs, they need to kind of see that the full supply chain, meets the same standards, whether it be carbon neutral through to practices throughout your organization, etc. So. Does that add a lot of cost to what you're doing?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I'll separate Balama and Vidalia. The Balama project, right from its inception, was set up with the highest global standards of ESG in mind, because it was a minimum 50-year mine life project. So, working in Mozambique, we've had a fantastic relationship with the government, and we've worked really positively with the local host communities as well, and made sure that they're part of the development of the mine. From an environmental perspective, we work to the same standards that we'd be working at in Australia or anywhere else. So that ESG differentiation is part of the very bedrock of the way that Balama has been developed. And it gives us a really strong differentiation point against some of the existing production, which is primarily in China. When I look at the US, we're planning and designing the Vidalia facility and what we've just announced in the BFS to ensure that it is environmentally differentiated compared to some of the existing production, because we understand that those requirements and US and European OEM requirements are stringent, and they're only going to become more stringent. One of the real benefits of the integration between Balama and Vidalia is that you have that full traceability and auditability of the material back to source.
It's interesting, actually. And just the process in the US, is it entirely green? So some companies, again, they come and go, we buy carbon credits. It's fine. Process is a little bit messy, but we can offset that. It seems like kind of a synthetic solution to it. So, I mean, how does it work there with, milling, shaping, purification, etc.? Is it a entirely green process itself?
It's not an entirely green process. What we're doing is putting in place a manufacturing facility which works to the standards that are absolutely required in the US, that minimises any environmental impact, but utilises the most efficient power source that we can source, and that creates a great cost competitive, high quality product, but one which is, manufactured in a way which is responsible from an environmental, social and governance perspective, but also is focused on a cost competitive outcome, because ultimately the market will drive to price and quality as the first stops on long-term supply. And ESG is important, but it will always be compared against the cost of alternatives, for sure.
Okay, so messages, you seem to be in control of the bits that you're in control of, which is great, but the market conditions is the kind of the final element that you're looking to, and you'll make a decision at some point in 2021, you hope, right?
Yeah, I would absolutely hope that the Balama can restart through the course of 2021. And I also believe that the combination of the testing, qualification processes, and the BFS and our interaction with OEMs and cell manufacturers puts us in a position to progress funding for Vidalia in 2021 as well. So we've got a lot of exciting stuff ahead of us next year, and certainly we've laid the foundations for that through a pretty challenging time over the last 12 months or so.
That it has been. 2020 was no different. Look, Shaun, thanks so much. It's nice to learn about the world of graphite. It was something that we don't see very, very often. So thank you for helping us wade our way through that. Good luck for the coming year. Got a few exciting moments coming up, I hope. Stay in touch. I'll be delighted to take your phone call.
Excellent. Thanks very much for the time, Matt. Appreciate the interest, and great to talk with you.